Well, thank you all for joining me today. My name is Rebecca Lehman, and I work with Esri's nonprofit program, supporting over 10,000 nonprofits globally. I'm happy to be sharing this virtual room with an impressive group of experts on GIS and food security. We're going to have an insightful and lively conversation about the important topic of food security, meaning safe and attainable access to healthy food for all. So why now and why food security? Well, a UN 2019 report showed some startling trends globally, citing a relative rise in undernourishment since 2015. These trends put us short of meeting our sustainable development goals of ending hunger by 2030. Now, with the added emergency of COVID-19, that is exacerbating existing challenges in creating food security. GIS plays a critical role in responding to food security, and I am joined by Francesco Stompanato of UN World Food Program, Charles Hoffman of 8451, and Nick DiSebastian of Atlanta Community Food Bank to discuss this more. So I want to start by asking each of you to speak a little bit about your personal journey in using GIS and food security. I'm going to start by asking Francesco Stompanato. Francesco is the Information and GIS Management Officer for the World Food Program's Latin America and Caribbean countries. He works to expand GIS technology across the region, identifying ways to support food security, especially in dry corridor countries. So Francesco, in a couple sentences, what led you to be involved with this work and why do you find it important?
Thanks, Rebecca. During my studies in telecommunication engineering 10 years ago, I volunteered with Engineers Without Borders to support a project in Madagascar. That was an amazing experience, very fulfilling. I saw clearly the impact of my work on vulnerable population, and I decided to follow that path. That experience led to 2 years after to have my first assignment with the World Food Program, which is one of the biggest organizations fighting hunger worldwide. And I still work there. Initially, I took care of GIS platforms to manage food security information and geospatial data, while now I'm more involved in supporting food security assessments, where I see the use of GIS increasing year by year.
Great, thank you so much. Next on our panel, we have Charles Hoffman, who is an analyst for Kroger's 8451. 8451 helps retail partners develop customer-driven relationships using technology and data analytics. In their home community of Cincinnati, 8451's data team used geospatial data to analyze food insecurity during COVID-19. Mapping information allowed stakeholders to see clearly where there were gaps in their distribution network. So Charles, I'm interested to know what led you to using GIS as a tool in addressing food security and what led 8451 to focus on this during COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rebecca. So we have some partnerships with various community members as part of Kroger's Zero Hunger, Zero Waste initiative. And so we've worked with the city before, and especially Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So when COVID spiked initially, Cincinnati Children's Hospital reached out to us to just see if there were any areas that we could dig in and start looking to help the community deal with a range of issues that have been caused by the virus. And the one that came out of that is kind of the first step would be to look at food insecurity within the city with a specific lens on food insecurity for children within the city of Cincinnati as schools closed and the free and reduced meal programs were a little bit harder to access and that changes had to be made to those. So that was why we started looking into it initially and went through a couple of rounds with Cincinnati Children's to see how we could look at that data prior to getting it in front of some of the leadership in the city of Cincinnati and the different food distribution organizations to see if there was any way to optimize what we were doing. And the reason that I've gotten to that is just I have a slight GIS background from being in Army intelligence for a little bit, so it was just a good crossroads for me to use my data science capabilities and previous skills to try to lean in and help during this period.
That's really neat. So finally, I'd like to introduce you to Nick DiSebastian. Nick is a marketing data analyst for Atlanta Community Food Bank, one of the largest hunger relief organizations in the Southeast. So they work with nearly 700 nonprofit partners to distribute over 60 million meals across the Metro Atlanta and North Georgia area. Nick, as a data analyst, why is food security important to you?
Thank you, Rebecca. Food insecurity is important because it's something that's faced all over our service area. For me specifically, I live in the city of Atlanta and I see people that are faced with hunger every day. So to work for the Atlanta Community Food Bank and be able to kind of address those issues on a larger scale it really speaks to me. I was focused on marketing and business intelligence as well as public health within a GIS context when I was in school. So when this position popped up, it was kind of a natural fit for me, and I was really glad to attain it. So yeah, we're working very hard right now amidst COVID to address issues of food insecurity in our service area.
Yeah, I can imagine this challenge is facing all of your organizations differently and definitely putting additional strains on them. Francesco, I'm wondering how you see kind of at that large scale the landscape of food insecurity changing due to COVID-19.
So Rebecca, this global pandemic has placed a significant stress on food security, especially in low and middle income countries and fragile states. So in WP, we estimate that the number of acute food insecure people in all the countries where we operate, around 90 countries around the world, could increase from 149 millions pre-COVID to 270 millions by the end of the year. Wow. Which is an 82% of increase, which is mostly due to job loss, remittances flows that are slowing down, and food systems that are put under stress and in some cases are totally disrupted to border closure and other internal constraints.
Nick, is that, are there consistencies there at the local level you're seeing in Atlanta? Have you started to kind of understand more what those trends are based on COVID-19?
So yes, is the short answer. We get a lot of our data about food insecurity from Feeding America. That's our, we call it our umbrella organization. They calculate rates of food insecurity each year, and this year they actually did some projections on how COVID-19 is affecting food insecurity. So our typical, the typical amount of people facing food insecurity is about 700,000 in our 38 county service area. Wow. That has, with the projections, they've estimated that 300,000 more people are experiencing food insecurity. So it's a huge demand. Another challenge is a lot of these people facing food insecurity amidst COVID-19 are experiencing it for the first time. So they may not understand how that affects the larger picture of their life, and they might not know the resources available to them. So we have definitely kind of bolstered our operations to deliver on that. And specifically for my team, the marketing team, we've made efforts to make sure that people know where they can access these resources that we can provide for them.
Right. Yeah, and it's exciting to see organizations like 8451 and folks that don't have a specific food insecurity focus getting involved at this time. Charles, what are some takeaways from the work you've done using GIS to respond during COVID-19, and how can they be applied to other areas or situations?
Yeah, so just to echo what both Nicholas and Francesco said, when we talk to food bank leadership here, they're seeing such an increase in people that have never come in for their services. The story that personified it for me was a father and his daughter coming in and her asking if they were coming there to volunteer again because they had volunteered at that food bank many times. And he said, no, we've made a lot of deposits here, and this time we have to make withdrawal. So as we think about how we were able to solve for that, and 8451's role in that, it was just to ensure that when we look at that organization as a whole and all of the organizations across Cincinnati, that we're ensuring that the most food insecure neighborhoods are represented. And the way that we looked at that, and the way that we use technology, was to ensure that within a mile walk radius of all of the different sites, that any population that was at high risk based on child poverty was within a 1 mile walk distance of one of those meal sites within the city of Cincinnati. Sorry, I told that story about the little girl, and I kind of lost my train of thought. Did I answer your question all the way, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's a really powerful story. And I think it's interesting, especially when we consider their food banks and this idea of making deposits in terms of your time. And yeah, I think my question, just to reiterate it, is what did you do in this case? Do you see that being useful in other situations as well?
We've worked with other organizations to try to apply the same methodology. And I think when we tackle any GIS problem, the first step is to identify our target population that we're trying to serve. So in this case, it was food insecure children, but I've also consulted with local diaper banks to look at low-income mothers in Cincinnati. We've looked at providing hygiene items and other COVID-specific items. We've looked at optimizing where we send Hispanic translators to ensure that we're serving that population where it exists. So yeah, I think that process of identifying your most at-risk populations in a specific instance, and then ensuring that the organizations that serve them are geographically dispersed in the most optimized way is very reproducible. Yeah,
and it's exciting to be able to deliver these data and technology use cases to organizations that often don't have the means to do that work. Nick, I'm wondering, what sorts of technology are you all using right now, specifically during COVID-19 at your food bank?
Sure. So the principal platform that I'm using that I can speak to is ArcGIS, specifically ArcGIS Online, to continue communicating where clients who are experiencing food insecurity can access resources for getting groceries or prepared meals. So we have a map online that has all of those sites plotted, and there's a tool where people can find the nearest facilities to them. We've made significant efforts to keep that as updated as possible. As you can imagine, the situation is very dynamic with partner agencies opening and closing. And the demand kind of fluctuating as unemployment is, changing day by day.
Right.
So that has been the principal means of communicating. And I mentioned that we've given great efforts to kind of keep it up to date. So we had an initiative to add details about how these places are operating. So a lot of partners have moved to a drive-through model where people are not so much shopping and walking through aisles to get food, but they're showing up and receiving prepared boxes of food or calling ahead to place an order. So I would like to think that it's been really beneficial for our service area to have these details, especially people who are experiencing food insecurity for the first time and maybe have never visited a partner agency, for them to say, okay, this is how it's going to go when I show up. These are the hours that I'm able to go and they can serve. It's been a lot of work, but I'm effective. And so, we wouldn't have been able to do it without that GIS platform.
Yeah, so people can go, either the folks who need the services can go on their phone or a website to look at all that, or folks who are trying to direct those people who are new to this system to the right sources can also use those tools. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, prior to mapping, we still have this service, but it was more like someone would call into our organization, the Atlanta Community Food Bank, and say, hey, I live here. And the receptionist would say, okay, give me one moment to look up via a list, where are the nearest agencies that can help you. And so now for the client to be able to do that and have it really efficiently laid out is a great improvement.
Oh yeah, I bet. Saves you guys some time too. Francesco, what sort of tools are you using to collect data? I know you have this huge region of Latin America and the Caribbean. So how do you kind of go about addressing that with GIS?
In normal times, we rely a lot on face-to-face assessments to understand where the food insecurity people live, how many there are, and how to best reach them with assistance they need. But now, due to the COVID pandemic, additional challenges have been introduced due to movement restrictions. So GIS tools for data collection and surveying have been extremely helpful for us to collect all this information remotely. And then easy to use tools like Operations Dashboard and Web App Builder have allowed us to provide accurate insights to decision makers in the organization. And then thanks to this information are trying to understand and planning the operation accordingly, understand how much resources are needed to provide assistance to those in need, but also what are the best modalities to implement to provide that assistance. Yeah.
So some similarities to what Nick is speaking to, using just an online platform to be able to, I guess it sounds like you're doing a lot more surveying to just understand what's needed. Is that right?
Yeah, we've mostly used web surveys, computer-assisted telephone interviews, and data collection tools like Survey123 or Kobo Toolbox to understand what has been the impact of COVID on not only on food security, but also on market access or livelihoods.
Yeah. So the theme of our conference this year is interconnectedness. And I want to pivot a bit and ask about your experience collaborating to address food insecurity across government, nonprofit, and private business. Charles, I want to start with you. Can you share one tip or takeaway from this sort of collaboration that you've led?
I think the biggest takeaway was probably just the amazing willingness of all the different organizations to come together, collaborate, and just fix anything we saw as a gap in our coverage for food distribution within Cincinnati. Because they've done an amazing job setting up a network very quickly that would serve a hugely expanded need within our city.
Yeah.
And knowing all the work they had already done, when gaps were pointed out, there was no angst about those gaps. It was just everybody stepping up to fix them as quickly as possible.
Wow.
And I think that type of collaboration is the main takeaway, because even within a city the size of ours, we have multiple different organizations that work to solve hunger, but they're not always necessarily working as one unit. They have different sources of funding and slightly different missions in many cases, but getting them together to look at food insecurity as a holistic problem across a full service area is, I think, the thing that everyone hopes that we keep going in the future, that network that has developed between those organizations and the city of Cincinnati to ensure that the problem is looked at and solved at a holistic level.
Yeah, one of the, I guess, unintended benefits of a crisis is forced collaboration. So that's really exciting just to hear how everybody wants to jump in and be involved. Francesco, what have you learned from collaborating across kind of this much broader scale of countries and organizations? What does that look like for the UN's program?
As part of my job in the past years, I've been collaborating a lot with the national governments and also the private sector to build information management systems for emergency response mostly. And I learned mostly two important lessons. The first one is the importance of open data sharing, because achieving food security requires collaboration between many entities, and each one is just a piece of the puzzle. So building systems that are interoperable and then foster open data sharing allows also to create evidence-based solution to solve this issue. And the second lesson is to allocate enough funds and resources, time for training and capacity building, because it doesn't only enables local staff to really embrace the technology for the long-term sustainability of the project, but it also allows them to leverage what is the knowledge of the country and the area where they live, to then design food assistance programs that have more acceptance from the local communities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the training is something that's often overlooked, especially with GIS. Is you have such a huge tool, but without the training, it's not going to start moving. So, so really great insights there. Nick, what have you done in connecting with partners and other nonprofits? What is your experience in things that work or don't work in those collaborative efforts?
So I think you mentioned early on that we work with about 700 partner agencies to actually distribute this food to clients who are in need. There is actually an entire department, well, 2 departments in our organization. One would be partner relations. So we are in constant communication with these locations that are distributing food. Public-facing ones, for example, would be pantries based out of a church or a community center. And then there are also private ones such as retirement homes or shelters. So yeah, it's really important that we maintain those relationships and we're in constant communication. We also have the Department of not benefits outreach, but compliance. So the compliance department is going to all of these organizations and making sure that they're abiding by our compliance regulations in terms of who they serve and how they serve, and that they are kind of up to date on how much they're ordering, and just kind of abiding by the agreement that we are in. So yeah, there's a lot of outreach to our distribution network. And then speaking to what Francesco said about open data sharing, we communicate very frequently with Georgia Department of Education for free and reduced meals program, as well as summer distribution sites for meals, and the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. That's also to communicate where sites are that people can get prepared meals, specifically children. So making sure that there's an open channel of communication so we can get the most up-to-date data is really important, and just so we have good relations, so if there is an issue, we can get to the bottom of it without too much of a challenge.
Right, and I mean, that says a lot. You have a whole department that manages those relationships. Speaks to how
2 departments, really.
Oh wow, yeah. It speaks to how kind of that softer side of the work is just as important as the data and technology piece. So Charles, a lot of your work at 8451 was about identifying these gaps in food distribution. I'm wondering what sort of data you used for this, and maybe if you have any suggestions on how another organization could get started with something like that.
So Rebecca, we used just openly available census data for the populations, and then also demographic data that are layer specific to some Esri GIS tools that we were using. And then we integrated all of the location data from our different food distribution organizations to map the locations and relate those to the at-risk population that we were trying to serve. So in this case, it was mapping the amount of children in poverty within the city, and then overlaying our food distribution locations with 1 mile walk radius or 1 mile walk buffers to ensure that we were covering all the highest need areas. And the main thing that I would suggest to anyone trying to look into this type of issue or a similar issue using GIS is to, again, identify your at-risk population, get those mapped so that you can have a good starting point of then overlaying where are we giving support versus where we might need to increase the amount of support that we're giving to that specific issue.
Yeah, and it's interesting you use those 1 mile walk buffers. Why did you choose walking and those buffers? How did you get to that?
That's a good question, and it's definitely a point of differentiation. Depending on where you're conducting a project like this, we've talked to the College of Charleston that's doing this broadly across a bigger area in the Carolinas to look at food insecurity. And in urban areas, the 1 mile walk radius or the 1 mile walk distance is appropriate. We want to ensure that poor families, poor individuals who don't have reliable access to transportation are within a reasonable walking distance to a food distribution location. As you move a model like this out into more rural areas, that would have to be adjusted. You just have to dig into the population and figure out what the appropriate distance is based on public transportation availability and private transportation availability. We worked with Cincinnati Children's and the city to find the most appropriate distance to use, and we settled on that 1 mile walk. Just a meal within a mile was kind of the goal of the project.
Yeah, and that's cool to see that you worked with those other organizations who have other insights about what makes sense there to come up with it together. Really good model there. Nick, I'm also curious about kind of the data piece with you all in terms of those collaborations with the nonprofits you mentioned. You're keeping all this information up to date about all of them. How do you collect and manage all that data? What is your system for that?
Sure. So it's kind of a combination of the ordering system, our customer relation management system, and then GIS. So we have access to data for each partner agency, which is our points of distribution of food that show how much food they have purchased and distributed. We can set the parameters, so maybe over the last fiscal year, or more recently, we can look at since the onset of COVID-19, how has their demand increased. We also have more categorical data on all of these partner agencies. So if they have capacity for refrigeration, we know that it might be somewhere that we want to encourage distribution of fresh produce. We can see what county they're in. So again, just looking at county profiles and matching what is the demand. Do we need to be encouraging more food to go to certain locations? Do we need to think about doing a mobile pantry? So we might use GIS for site selection to see where is a gap in service, but a need or a demand. So yeah, we have quite a lot of details on each of these locations to distribute food.
Yeah, and it sounds like it enables you to really rapidly to respond with kind of those mobile pantries or whatever's needed in a certain situation. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So Francesco, looking more broadly, I guess almost globally, but at the bigger scale you're at, we expect more natural disasters, civil unrest due to, in part, the continued climate crisis. I'm wondering how your organization uses data-driven decisions to cultivate community resilience in looking towards the future.
So with the increased use in technology and broader access to information in the past 10 years, we have been using a lot spatial analysis to support, for instance, small order farmers to grow their production and also to connect them with markets.
Right.
And open data available to OpenStreetMap, for instance, has been key. And also technology provided by Esri, RGS Pro, and the whole RGS Online platform has been extremely helpful. Unfortunately, there is still a digital division. It's one of the biggest issues that we have in our society. So I believe that the broader access to technology, but especially to internet in less developed countries, would be the game changer.
Right. Even for those farmers or small scale agriculture to be able to connect, you're saying it might increase their ability to respond to those disasters.
Yeah, and you use the whole potential that is given by technology now to bridge the gap.
Totally. All right, well, thank you all for this amazing conversation. I think all these different perspectives on what is a very large and what we call a wicked problem, intertwined with so many other issues of food security was really interesting. I want to end on talking about what the future looks like. So food security means all people at all times have physical, social, economic access to sufficient and nutritious food to meet their healthy lifestyle. So we have food and hunger as two main issues for our world. And I'm wondering, what does a future of food security look like? And will we get there, and how? I'm going to start by asking Nick about this.
Sure. So the issue of food insecurity is a persistent one. It is something that at the Atlanta Community Food Bank we're continually trying to address, not just by providing people meals, but trying to help them move to the next stage of their life where they might not face this. Mm-hmm. That being said, I can't say that it will ever be cured, to answer your question, but with the use of technology and data, we can more effectively find who and where is being affected by food insecurity and how we can more effectively address those issues.
Definitely. Charles, moving over to you, how do you see our future looking in a more food secure world?
Thanks, Rebecca. So I think the goal should always be that we live in a food secure world. Whether or not we can get there, we'll never be 100% food secure, probably close to it, because it's such a dynamic issue to tackle. And we've seen that with COVID-19. All the different things that we had in place to deal with food insecurity were not going to be sufficient in the global pandemic state that we're in to deal with that increased need. So it's just having the structures in place to expand and adapt, but also never settling for where we're at. So in our project, we tried to make sure that we had meal sites within a mile of our most at-risk populations. And once we had that, we tried to make sure that we got that info available on a public website to where people could use it. And now we're focused on not just ensuring that people geographically have access, but also that they're getting the number of meals to truly feed the gap from those sites. So each victory is just another goal to add to further it. And we might not get there, but we can keep trying.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Charles. And Francesco, can we solve food security, and how?
I fully agree with Charles. So food security is a very complex issue, especially in times when food demand is increasing exponentially and there are additional challenges due to climate change and increased conflicts. So the World Food Program and other organizations are working hard to provide surge food assistance and try to build a resilient community. But in my opinion, the only chance we have to end hunger is to start acting individually. So stop expecting positive change only from big organization, and start making the difference in the way we live. Deciding properly what type of food we consume, where we buy it, and especially reducing waste. So these are the only way that I see to reduce food insecurity and have a positive impact in the future of the generations to come.
Thank you so much, Francesco. And that's a really nice note to end on, thinking about our own roles in this. And I'm really hopeful about how technology is really enabling all of your organizations to address this issue at a much broader scale and respond to this crisis. So thank you so much for joining me today, Nick, Charles, and Francesco, and looking forward to seeing what all your organizations do in the future. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca and all.
Thanks, all you guys. Have a great day. I appreciate it.